Thank you everyone for coming this morning. We probably have a few more join us throughout, but that's fine. So for those of you that don't already know me, my name is Adam Selwood. I'm one of the co-founders and the CTO at Cinch Security. Thank you all for joining us. Today we'll be talking about passwords and password management and the importance of it and how fundamental it is to keeping your business safe and secure. We will be running sessions like this on an ongoing basis. We've run a few already. If you have any suggestions for other sessions or things that you'd like us to cover, please let us know. And you can follow us on social media. We're all over the place. And if you'd like to be notified for any upcoming things as well. So yeah, great to have you all here today. Just before we start, a little bit of housekeeping. Thank you all for going on mute. There will be opportunity for questions and whatnot at the end. Please feel free to throw them into the chat in the interim. We'll also cover them off if it makes sense throughout. And so more than happy to have an interactive session. Please keep your camera off for the moment. Again, unless you'd like to be seen or ask a question. The main reason for that is that we are recording. So you know, if you would prefer not to turn up on a YouTube clip somewhere, we'll edit you out, but yeah, it's probably easiest to keep your camera off and stay on mute for the time being. As I mentioned, we'll take questions in chat. Happy to answer anything along the way. There will be time towards the end. Probably take around about sort of 40-45 minutes for the full session. It won't take the full hour unless we get into some interesting conversation at the end, which we're always keen to have as well. Before we get started, a little bit more about us at Cinch, just to give you a bit of background. If you revisiting us from a while ago, or you haven't quite encountered us yet, so Cinch was started by Susie Jones, my co-founder, and I back in 2018. We have come from large enterprise corporate space, previously at Australia Post, running cyber risk and cyber resilience initiatives there. As well as in a number of other capacities in larger corporates throughout our careers. At Australia Post, we were given the opportunity to immerse ourselves into the problems and the challenges around small business and cybersecurity in particular, and left in late 2018, early 19 to basically embrace and focus on that as part of Cinch. So we are, as I mentioned, fully focused on small businesses and micro businesses. So really designed, and we aim to help those owners and other sort of experts and responsible people within businesses to understand their cyber risk and take the steps that they need to take to get on top of all of that. We focus on what we call cyber fitness as opposed to cyber security. And when we say cyber fitness, it's really about taking steps a little bit like your physical fitness on a gradual ongoing basis to build it up and be resilient to cyber risks, as opposed to trying to deal with cybersecurity and all the technical, very overwhelming aspects of that. So we've established and built our platform, which is our cyber fitness platform, designed to help specific individuals within a business really take on the responsibility that they have, wrap their arms and get on top of all of their cyber risk, and take small, simple steps, 5 minutes at a time, to just gradually improve and manage that risk as they grow. We're building that out constantly and adding new features. And again, really keen to hear anyone's thoughts and inputs on that if they have any. While we're relatively new, so we've only been around sort of a year and a bit now live. So that we're really proud to have over 200 Australian businesses on our platform and more joining us each day. So we are sort of growing and building, and we're really excited to have the opportunity to help as many Australian businesses as possible. And would really encourage you to check us out if you haven't already. But down to brass tacks. So today we're going to be talking and giving you a good overview of password management and how to tackle that and the challenges associated with that in small businesses. First, we'll be talking a lot about, we'll be covering off why it's important. So really helping you to understand what the challenges are, why securing your accounts and managing your passwords is a really fundamental thing that you need to be thinking about in your business. After that, we'll also have a quick chat and look into, how do people actually get access and steal passwords in the first instance. We'll explore the sorts of things that you can do to actually get on top of that and how to approach and what you should be thinking about doing in your business if you're not already. And then at the end, we'll sort of cover off and explain sort of where you can go to get help and how to do some more about protecting that in an ongoing manner. But first, I'd like to introduce you to Mark. You might have met him once or twice before or know of him. And Mark, we like to talk about because back in 2012, Mark's password for LinkedIn was stolen by a group of hackers. And the hackers sat on this information for quite a few years until it turned up for sale on the darknet back in 2016. So a few years ago now, but not that long. Mark's password was sitting there alongside at least 2.5 million other passwords, including mine, on the darknet, basically ready for anyone to purchase. It was quite an interesting situation. There were actually quite a few different leaks like this at the time. Unlike my password, though, unfortunately, Mark's password wasn't particularly strong. So the password that he had signed up and started to use was reasonably weak. In fact, it was da. So six characters. I guess you could almost call it 2 characters repeated. But yeah, pretty simple, basic password that he'd used to protect his LinkedIn persona and his account online. So pretty soon, whilst these accounts and these passwords were up for sale initially, eventually they just started to get shared around freely amongst hackers. And so pretty much within a couple of weeks, everyone had a copy of this database of passwords, including Mark's password sitting alongside his email address. And eventually, pretty soon after that, even some enterprising criminals decided to see whether or not Mark was using that same very simple basic password somewhere in other places. And what had turned out to happen was that Mark had actually been using that same password of da in other accounts that he'd established online. So not only in LinkedIn, but he'd also had it on Twitter, he'd also had it on Pinterest, and in a few other different places. And this is a password and an accounts that he'd set up back in 2012. And again, we're learning about this in 2016. So not only did he have a really poor password, he'd reused it in multiple places, and he hadn't actually done anything to secure or change those passwords over time. And the result of all of this at the end of the day was that someone was able to take over his account. In fact, there were multiple people taking over multiple accounts at the time, and they ended up defacing it and putting all sorts of messages up there and sort of encouraging him to do a better job at securing his accounts and doing all the other things. And so by reusing the same password in multiple places and having a poorly, a weak one at that, really exposed Mark and left him in a position where hackers were actually getting access to him, really embarrassing him online, and as the face for his business, really did not reflect well both on himself, but also Facebook more generally. And so, a bit of a PR nightmare, not to mention just the challenge of then going out and trying to recover these accounts and doing all of the stuff that happens around that. So an interesting story from back in the day, and just sort of shows how few sort of poor password management practices can really have ramifications regardless of where you do it. And so it's really important to think about and apply good password management practices everywhere that you possibly can. So it's actually, it's been reported that back in 2018, almost 81% of data breaches were actually caused by, in some part, poor password security practices. And so the result of this is mainly through a few different things that cause this. So as we mentioned, password reuse that Mark had been doing. So around about 65% of people reported back in this study that they were using the same password across multiple systems. Not only that, they were potentially using easy to guess passwords. So nearly 80% of services allow you to set up a weak password, which is a challenge, but it just sort of implies and shows that we really need to take responsibility and ensure that we're using strong passwords wherever possible. 69% of employees actually admit to sharing passwords with their colleagues as well. So no matter how strong your password is, or how strong or how much you encourage your team to use strong passwords, if they're sharing them around quite freely, then that is going to be a problem as well, and that's going to undermine the security and the practices that you have there. And lastly, passwords are getting stolen. So as we mentioned, LinkedIn was compromised, and every day we hear about new data breaches and more data being compromised in that sort of a fashion. So, it's it's likely at some stage that your accounts and your passwords will be compromised, and we need to think about that. We need to prepare and manage our passwords as much as possible to avoid that sort of situation that Mark encountered that we mentioned. This sort of information back from 2018 was actually backed up locally as well last year or earlier this year in reporting from the Australian Office of Information Commissioner, or OAC. They actually found in their reporting that around about 80% of the data breaches reported to them in Australia were also from, in some part, resulted from poor password habits like Mark's. So it is quite a systemic issue. It's something that we all need to be mindful of. And as business owners, and in small businesses in particular, we need to try to help our sort of teams and make sure that we're doing all the right things when we approach that. So one of the questions that we always try to answer is, why would someone be going after your passwords or trying to get access to your accounts in the first place? There's a few different reasons. One of the primary ones is that it's probably the easiest way for someone to actually get access to your data, particularly now as we're using a bunch of cloud services and all of our systems are protected by passwords at the end of the day. It's often that we'll, it's quite easy for someone, if they have your password, to then get in, get access to your emails, get access to all the data that you've stored, get access to any of the critical systems that they can do. Potentially as well, if you're reusing that account somewhere, it can give them access to all sorts of other things too. Can also provide them with a way to impersonate you and or access your contacts with the intent that they can then communicate and impersonating you in some fashion. So whether that's them trying to get your password so that they can get into your email, so that they can contact your partners or your colleagues or customers to really try to encourage them to do something dangerous and really leveraging off your business's reputation and the trust that you have with these sorts of colleagues as well. Can also be a really effective way if they can get access to your passwords and to your accounts. It's a really straightforward way for them to actually just cause harm to your systems. So they may, once they have your password, they'll be able to, from that point, potentially install something dangerous, delete data, just generally cause havoc. And that in turn can lead to them being able to ransom you or doing other things. So really, passwords is often the key thing that they'll be looking for to give them access to cause harm and do things beyond just trying to compromise and get access to your data more generally. And lastly, criminals, depending on how your business operates and its sort of place within the ecosystem, will often look at your accounts and the ways of compromising your business as a way to get access to other businesses or other systems. So they may be looking to actually target a larger business, but because of the relationships that you have with them, you may be the easiest point for them to get in. And then again, they can leverage off the trust that you have in those relationships to compromise other bigger systems would be another purpose for that. One interesting thing to look at though is just how much value they place into these cyber criminals, how much value they actually put on these types of accounts. So the way that a cyber criminal will often operate is that they'll look for large numbers of accounts. They'll look for big bang for buck. They'll go out and try and just collect as many of them as possible. And the outcome of that is that for many types of accounts and logins and passwords, they're actually really not worth that much. In fact, some people might consider these things as pretty affordable on the darknet. So you can see there's a few different prices that you can go on to the darknet based on some research there and pick yourself up someone's account and password. So if you didn't want to pay a Netflix subscription, you could purchase someone's account, the login for their account for $10. If someone's personal email, Gmail account is something that you're after, you could get that for around about $6. Obviously, these are way less. The prices for these are way less than what you would actually think of them, the value for you, either as an individual or as a business. And so your Office 365 password or login or account, or your G Suite account, or just the login that you use day to day for Xero or something along those lines, could actually be worth way more than that for you, but might be just caught up and put into a big list that someone's purchasing. And so often someone will buy these accounts not as a one-off, but they might buy big batches of this stuff and get it even cheaper. Of course, so it's really important to think about, these things. This is a good indication of just how easy it is for people to collect and compromise large volumes of accounts, and something to be mindful of. In fact, it's quite expensive for us as business owners if this sort of thing happens. And recently, actually, as recent as last month, Asic actually brought proceedings against RI Advice and their parent company because password management, in part, because password management practices were pretty lax. There had been some cybersecurity incidents as a result of that, and the outcome for RI Advice in this instance is there's proceedings from Asic looking at almost 10% of their annual turnover is what they're going after. So things like strong password management and just general cyber hygiene are really fundamental and important for you as a business to be on top of. And we're seeing increasingly that it's going to put pressure on your business if you're not on top of these things and around that. So Asic, in this example, it was really looking for, disappointed in the practices and the hygiene. And so whilst the compromise of the accounts and the fallout of the incident was one cost, they're now having to deal with the fallout of, a broader fallout of Asic proceedings and legal costs around that, plus the potential fines that come with that. So it's really important that we think about this more generally. So the way that hackers actually will compromise their accounts is, before I get into that. So there's a few key things that we need to think about when we're thinking about how to set up a strong password. There's really three unique aspects to strong passwords that are really important to keep in mind. So the first one is, as we say, their size matters. So a longer password is going to be more difficult for someone to undermine and compromise. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. The uniqueness of your password is also fundamental. So Mark reusing his password across multiple services really means that it wasn't unique at all. And once it was compromised in one place, it becomes compromised in others. It's also relevant to think about the common passwords that people are using and ensuring that you're not using commonly used passwords, because that, again, is reasonably straightforward for someone to undermine and compromise. And they're likely to try that if they're trying to get into your account. And the third really key component is that it should be hard to guess. So that even if you've got a massively complicated and long and unique password, if someone can readily guess it because it's your favorite catchphrase or something along those lines, it's really not going to keep you very secure. So the reason that size matters when we talk about strong passwords is really because the way that most passwords get cracked or hacked once they get access to it in some fashion, or recognize that your account is one that they potentially could compromise, is that essentially what a hacker or a cyber criminal will do is that they will use a really fast computer, the fastest computer that they can get access to, and they will literally try every single combination in some sort of logical sequence until they actually get access and figure out the right one for your account. So think of it as a little bit like smashing down your front door with a sledgehammer. They're just going to sit there and keep banging away at your account until eventually they bash the door down and they can get into your house. Sort of now what's been happening over time is that the hammers that people have access to have gotten bigger, and now it's a little bit more like a wrecking ball. So they have these massive lists of very commonly used passwords, shorter passwords, and they'll just smash away, and they'll take your LinkedIn password if you've got that, if they have access to that, or any other passwords that they know for your account, and they'll just sit there and bash away at your different accounts until they can get in. So it's really fundamental that we think about that. Now, the longer that your password is, as you can see from this table, the more it costs someone, the bigger the hammer it is that they need to bash your door down. And so really you're looking at, the longer the password that you have, the better it is. You can see there that if you add a bit of complexity, so you don't use the common passwords, that can be helpful, but really lengthen the longer the password, the better. And one of the ways, as you can sort of see down the bottom there, that it's recommended that you approach this is actually to use something called a passphrase instead of a password. And so instead of trying to create passwords that are long and complex and really hard for you to remember, if you do need to remember one, think about creating a passphrase. So use multiple words, add some grammar in there, Again, don't make it easy to guess. Don't make it your catchphrase that you go around the office yelling around all the time. But again, come up with something that makes sense to you that you can remember, add some grammar to that. And at the end of the day, you'll have a really strong, long password. But again, don't use that same password in multiple places. So I mentioned that my LinkedIn password, it was also compromised alongside Mark's password that we spoke about earlier. And the reason I know this is because I actually use and subscribe to a free service called Have I Been Pwned? So if you're not familiar with Have I Been Pwned, it's essentially what it does is it allows you to log on and check to see whether the passwords or the email address that you use, regardless of what email address it is, whether it's a personal one or it might be something that you use for your business, to see whether or not those email addresses have been caught up in any of the larger sort of very well-known publicly shared data breach sets that are out on the internet. And so you can go and you can visit that. Now, it's a service that's run by a very well-regarded security researcher out of Queensland called Troy Hunt. It's been around for quite a while. It's a fairly well used. It's actually used by a lot of government organizations, government departments and whatnot now as well. So it's been tested. It's fairly well respected in that regard. You can go in and enter any email address that you like, and it will return to you a list of these are all of the places where this email address has been identified as being compromised in some sort of data breach. And the takeaway for you from that will be that password, and one of the really interesting bits about this service is that it will not tell you what the password was. But what you do know is that at some stage, the password for that service was compromised and is potentially in the hands of a cyber criminal now. And so what you need to think about in that context is firstly changing the password for that account and going in and making sure that that account is still secure. And then anywhere else where that same password has been used, you need to ensure that those places are being changed. That's really challenging and a hard problem to solve for. And so it's always best practice and always thinking about just from day one is to ensure that you're using unique passwords everywhere so that if you do learn that one of these sites has been compromised, you don't have to worry about the fallout of that password being undermined elsewhere as well. It's as I mentioned, I'm signed up for notifications from a personal email address and certainly encourage everyone to do the same for yourself. But also we've signed up at Cinch for our business domains. So where we have email enabled, we're also monitoring and Have I Been Pwned will let us know if anyone in our team's email address, or in fact, any email address that has our domain in it at all, we get notified if that happens, and we can then internally within our business actually go off and deal with the fallout of that. So that's a really useful, powerful tool for us, and we certainly encourage all small businesses or all businesses, in fact, even Australia Post, as we know, it signs up and subscribes to these types of services as well. So, it's a really useful thing to be registered for, and helps you to understand what the potential implications are so that you can go off and remediate and address those types of things in your business. So if you've gone through and tested that service out, you might notice if you've turned up anywhere that they recommend a password manager. And probably the key takeaway from us for today is really to make sure that you're using password manager to help you to manage and stay using strong passwords everywhere. And I'll dig into that a little bit more now. Just take a drink. So to take back control of passwords, either as an individual and also across your business, a password manager is really the core and the fundamental thing that you should be thinking about doing. So it's really hard to remember hundreds of passphrases for every single service that you subscribe to online. And so it's always better to try to remember just a handful of really important ones, and then work and use a password manager to manage and help you with the rest of them. And so first thing, if you haven't already done it, is to pick a password manager for your business and work and ensure that your whole team is using it as well. So there's a few sort of good options out there that we recommend. So and I'll show you later, we can help you get access to 1Password if that's one that you're interested in doing, but there's plenty of options out there. And really the key takeaway here is to ensure that you do adopt one within your business. And it can be the same one that you use in your personal life or not. You can have multiple if you really want, but the key is to implement a password manager and make sure that you're using it. And the reason for that is that Password Manager will generate a generally secure, strong password. It will make it long, it will make it unique and complex, make it very hard to guess because it will be completely random. It will store that, and then as long as you can get in securely to your Password Manager, it will always give you access to that password whenever you need it. It can also help you if you do have a need internally to share passwords. And we said earlier that, around about 65% of employees are sharing passwords amongst themselves. It can give you a more secure way of actually doing that with your team, not having it written down or shared in spreadsheets or other places around that. Now, there's some other things to think about if you do have that requirement, but it is, it is a fundamental aspect of how you can deal with that too. The other really important thing to do to take back control is wherever you can is to implement and enable multi-factor authentication. So if you're not familiar with multi-factor authentication, it's essentially a second step that's required to get into your account after you've entered in a password. So you can think of it a little bit like going to the ATM with your bank card. You enter the bank card, you also need to enter in the PIN. So that would be two things that you need, both the card and your PIN number. In the instances of online accounts and your email and whatever it might be, you have your email address and password. That is one thing, something that you know, but also you would have something that you have. And typically that'll be an SMS message sent to you or an app that will create a code that you can enter, or more increasingly, and something that we encourage businesses to look at is a physical USB token or a Bluetooth token that you physically have that can unlock your account as well. So really the key thing is to take back control in a small business is look at and implement a password manager, start to embrace that and introduce that as part of your business culture. And then moving towards after that is also to ensure that you are implementing multi-factor wherever it's possible. Really importantly, to ensure that that's been implemented on things like your password manager. So any of the sort of fundamental critical accounts that your business relies on, look for and enable multi-factor authentication. If you haven't already, and you're using something like Office 365 or G Suite, you can control that as an administrator and you can go in and update those settings. And again, that's something that we're happy to help you with if you have questions around that. So at Cinch, we've, as I mentioned earlier, really built a platform to help businesses take control and get on top of that. But whether or not you choose to work with us or leverage our platform for that, there's a few steps that you could think about following when you start to explore and start to work on handling your passwords. So the first thing is to figure out all the places where strong passwords need to be, and the management and where it's important for your business to get on top of passwords. Once you've done that, you need to think about prioritizing that. There's going to be hundreds of them, so you need to really explore and look for chances of that password being compromised, and then potentially the damage that password can cause your business, and prioritize your efforts around that. From there, then familiarize yourself with the basics and make sure that your team understand that as well. So that doesn't necessarily in the first instance need to be a policy that you establish, but you should really be clear with them and remind your entire team that they should be using strong, unique, and hard to guess passwords wherever possible. Implementing a password manager, as I've rattled on about it a little bit, is a really important step, something that you should be looking at. Also encouraging that your team do that as well. And then once you've got those sort of fundamentals in place, you really need to start then looking through that prioritized list of places where those passwords are and starting to migrate them over into your password manager. And as you go through that, implementing and enabling multi-factor authentication wherever it is available. So it's a really important step. So it's just sort of fundamentally sort of stepping through and going through, logically trying to wrap your arms around that. It will take you days if you wanted to just in once-off effort go in and try to migrate everything over. So you need to kind of just come up with a process, prioritize your efforts around that, and then start working with your team to get everyone on board and get all of those passwords under control. So one of the things we know at Cinch is that it's really hard to get started. And so what we've developed to help businesses when they're getting started is our 6-week cyber bootcamp program. And it's just been recently launched in the last month, and we've already got sort of dozens of businesses interacting and working through that, which is really, really rewarding, and we're quite proud of that. What the program gives you access to is a series of expert recommendations from our specialists. So Fiona's on the call here today with me, and we've developed and designed this to really help businesses deal with some of the really key fundamental first areas of concerns that they should be dealing with. Every single program that's developed is tailored to your business. So you would have seen in the sort of brief demo before, we always start with the specific technologies that you use. So we'll make recommendations and detailed guidance into the specific technologies you use, so that you're not sort of wasting time and looking at things that aren't relevant for you. We also cover off a stack more than what we've already covered today. So not only will we help you sort of acknowledge the need to introduce a password manager and help you step through that and turning MFA on, guide you through all of those steps. We'll also give you some advice on how to secure and get that password manager implemented into your business in the right way so that it stays there and can be used on an ongoing basis. Everything that we do and we offer in our platform and in our programs is always in plain language. So hopefully that came across today. I didn't speak too much jargon or confusing stuff. Please let me know if that's not the case. And we always try to do things in a way that we break everything down in a way that you can then go off and implement those things and get some meaningful outcomes for your business in 5 minutes or less. It's a really, really fundamental thing. We understand, both the challenge of trying to navigate a complex landscape and just not having time in a small business context is a really difficult trade-off to try to manage, and so we're very mindful of that in everything that we do. So as you see there, it's free for the moment, so you can go to our website, you can sign up for the program for free, and we're seeing the value of this as over $2,500 or more. So really great opportunity for businesses to get on top of and start to work through a bunch of stuff that they may be grappling with at any point in time. And that brings me to the end of my spiel and my rant. And so hopefully you've taken on some things away from that. Hopefully that's helped to sort of highlight some of the challenges around password management, give you a few pointers on where to go and the sorts of things that you should be thinking about doing. And yeah, open to any questions that anyone might have if they have some. See, nothing sort of popped up in the chat yet, but please feel free to jump in there and share any questions that you might have. Security of password managers, this is a very good one. So a few years back, there were some, this one comes up fairly often when we're talking to businesses. Firstly, it's important to acknowledge that. So the key issue that many of us sort of look at when we look at password managers is, okay, well, I used to have all of these passwords everywhere, and now I've just put them into one big bucket, and now I'm really worried about the security of that bucket. So what happens if the bucket gets a hole in it or tipped over? So a few years ago, there were some issues identified with some of the password managers out there. There's a few researchers out there actively trying to see whether or not there were vulnerabilities there, and they did find a few. All of those have been addressed is really the first thing to take away from that. But the other thing that we identified there is that all of the password management platforms and providers responded really well to that. They worked with the researchers. As soon as an issue was found, they fixed the vulnerabilities. They pushed that out to all of their teams, and their practices are really fantastic and robust. So first thing is that those platforms and password managers themselves are very secure, and you can be very confident once you put something in there that it will stay protected. That said, it is also really important that you do the right things in securing that. So again, have a strong password on that password manager. Don't share the password for that with anyone else. Make sure that you're doing the right things outside of that as well. The other key consideration there is that the security of password managers and the security benefits that you get are going to be way more outweigh the alternatives. So if you're having to store a bunch of passwords in a spreadsheet or write them down in a book, or you're having to try to remember them all of those have issues that are way bigger than having them stored and protected in a password manager. So yeah, it's always better to put them in a password manager. There are some instances where we might not do that. So which is the next question that Fiona's shared with us there as well. So the question being, how what shouldn't we put into a password manager? And there are some rules that we sort of follow there. So certainly the password for your password manager shouldn't be in your password manager. It gets a little bit circular at that point. So you need to think about and put some practices in place for protecting that account. We would recommend that you don't necessarily store your email password in your password manager. That tends to be nowadays the key to the kingdom for all of the other accounts that you have. So if someone can get into your email, then put that somewhere else. And so that we would put it on par with your password manager account. Any administrator accounts for your really fundamental core systems that you rely on, you probably want to put a little bit more diligence around those and sort of protect it really carefully. It could be something that needs to sit in a password manager, but you sort of need to weigh the trade-offs around that type of thing. And anything that could cause really significant damage to your business if it got out offline. So whilst password managers are super secure and really robust, it is still possible that could be undermined or compromised at some point, or the password, that you copy it, you needed to copy it out of the password manager for some reason, and it sits around on a post-it note. Potentially it's better for you to have that secured in a different way, and possibly remembered or stored some other way. So as an alternative to a password manager for those types of accounts, we typically recommend that you write it down on a piece of paper and lock it up physically somewhere secure that you've got a lot of control over and a lot of trust. So in a safe that you're trustworthy, that you know and have control over. You could also consider splitting the password into 2 pieces and then sharing that with 2 trusted people, and then sort of a little bit like the nuclear keys where you need to put them both in at the same time. 2 people have to come together to enter that password. So it really depends on sort of the security level that you need, and something that you should be thinking about. So I got a question here, excuse me, about the keychains that come with Mac laptops and iPhones. So your iCloud keychain, which is a great question. It is quite similar as well if you're storing and saving passwords in a web browser. So Chrome is another example where Google will happily share your passwords for you. So the security of those is good. So also a lot better to have the passwords generated by those types of services and whatnot. The really challenging, the thing that you need to think about though, is that is going to be your ability to access those passwords is going to be restricted to those specific devices. So wherever you got an iCloud, if you only ever use your Mac and your iPhone, and you're a sole operator, so you don't have any need to be able to sort of share or manage passwords across a team, then your keychain on your Mac is probably fine for your purposes. Certainly for personal purposes, it's probably fine. If you have devices that don't have access to your keychain, or you need to kind of manage your passwords across a team, it's very difficult to do that and manage that effectively, and you'll find that you're going to have different approaches for different things. So we always recommend putting in an approach that's going to work in as many possible situations as you can find. And so we certainly suggest that a password manager is going to give you that sort of central management point if you have a team, but also is going to work across all the browsers, all the devices, and all the different places that you need. Plus, they will run and operate a cloud service that you can, if all of that stuff disappeared tomorrow, you could also go back and recover it from there. So dedicated password management services are typically a better answer, because it will cover 95% of your use cases, and so you won't have other scenarios that you'll have to address. But again, if you are a sole operator and you only really have Apple devices, and you don't see that changing anytime in the future, that might be quite okay. It's certainly going to tick the boxes that we spoke about. It will allow you to create and generate strong passwords. It will allow you to have unique passwords across all your services, and it will also allow them to be difficult to guess. So they'll be hard to guess in that instance. So yeah, hopefully that answered the question. Changing passwords. Okay, so Security specialists in the past, the recommendation used to be, and that you will still find instances where the best practice, as it's described, is to change passwords every 30, 45, 60, 90 days. So regularly going in and changing passwords. And you often find this in a business environment. So the idea being that if a password is compromised, it's only going to work for a period of time and then it will get rolled over. And so, there's some security associated with that. What the industry has learnt since those sorts of recommendations started to be made is that everyone that follows that guidance essentially just adds a number to the end and increments it. So if it's going to check for the last 12 passwords because I'm asked to change it every month, I'm just going to add the month on the end, or I'm going to add a number and just increment that by 1 each time. So the net result of that is that it's very easy to guess those types of passwords, and they've become that third component. It's an easy to guess password. So if you've seen or you have access to the previous password, it's a good chance the next password you could figure out very quickly if you didn't already know it. So the better recommendations or practices nowadays is to provide the guidance at the moment. Is to only ever change a password if you feel if there's a likelihood that it has been compromised in some way. And so that's where something like Have I Been Pwned is a really useful, powerful tool, because if you find that your password has been compromised in one of these places, it gives you an opportunity and makes you aware that you need to go and change that password. The result of that at the end of the day is you don't have to change passwords all the time. So if in Mark's instance, he wasn't aware until 2016 that his 2012 password had been compromised. But in the moment he got to 2016 and he learned that the password had been compromised, he should have gone off and changed them all. Him going and changing passwords in the lead up to that might have fixed it, but he probably had ..1 or ..LinkedIn. And then someone could have very easily gone and said Twitter. So it's it's really not the best advice to go out now and enforce regular changing of passwords, particularly in an office environment. Again, instead, it's better to understand and try to be aware of possible compromise of those passwords, and then if that's happened, then change the password, and instead focus on long or stronger passwords, long, unique, and hard to guess passwords. I'll take one more question. We're up to 45 minutes, so we'll take one more if there is one, and then we'll call it a day. Nothing else popping around? It's probably one other thing that does pop up every now and then that's probably worth mentioning. So a lot of businesses or individuals will use their Google or Office 365 or Facebook account as a mechanism to log into another account or create an account somewhere else. So it's generally a good option, particularly if you have put the right security in place in the service that you're using to log in. So so we use Google at Cinch, and so we enforce multi-factor authentication. We all use strong passwords and password managers and those types of things. But we're very highly confident. We monitor for any issues that might pop up in the accounts in Google for our team and ourselves. And so we're very confident in the security of the Google accounts. And so for us, we can use that to log into another service. Now, we don't necessarily prescribe that. We always encourage a password manager as the first preference. There's a couple of reasons for that. The main one is that when you associate your Google or your Office 365 or Facebook account with a third-party service, it's not necessarily that they actually get access to different information. So one thing they don't get access to is your password. So that's good. But they will, depending on how that's been set up, they will actually ask for and be authorized to access different things. So if you're using Calendly or even Zoom, and you've associated that and linked that to your Google account, it will have access to every single, to your entire calendar. and it will be able to see every single meeting that's been associated with that calendar. So you need to be thinking about, is that type of information okay for Zoom or Calendly to be aware of? That's kind of the key thing to think about. It's a good mechanism for authenticating and getting access to things. It means that you don't have to generate passwords and store them all and do all the other things. You don't have to have all of these different accounts. You can have that one central account. But if you're using your Gmail account, or you're giving them access to other things, you just need to be really mindful of that. And so it's something to share with your team is, if you are going to set up or use accounts in that way, just be really careful about the other information and access that you're giving those services as well. Other than that, if there's any other questions, feel free to flick us an email on social media, as you've seen there. You can get us at hello@cinch.com.au, or basically we'll respond wherever you can get access to us. So hopefully you got some good takeaways from that. And yeah, please feel free to follow us, and we'll see you next time, hopefully. Thank you.